Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekly Washington Monthly live stream political podcast. I'm Paul Glastris, editor in chief of the Washington Monthly. We have our regular crew here: executive editor digital Matt Cooper, uh, politics editor Bill Scher, and Kim behind the control booth. And we are very excited to have our what we call our Kiev correspondent, the great Tamar Jacoby, Kiev-based director of the Progressive Policy Institute's New Ukraine Project, with us. She has a story up on the Washington Monthly's website today called "How to Reverse Trump's Capitulation to Putin." Um, Thank you, folks, for being here. Thank you, Tamar, for joining us. Just a little background in case for the last 4 days you've not picked up your phone or read the news. On Friday, the President Trump had a shameful face plant of a summit meeting with uh, Vladimir Putin in Anchorage, Alaska. Um, Trump invited Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the White House today, and a team of European leaders, including the European Commissioner, the head of NATO, the presidents of France and Germany, insisted on coming to back uh, Zelensky and try to persuade Trump to take a tougher line than he certainly did uh, uh, in Anchorage. So that's what we're here to discuss. And I want to first start, Tamar, with you. You are the guest of honor. In your story, you explain that in the run-up to the Anchorage summit, things were a little bit quiet in Kiev and elsewhere in Ukraine. That was not the case last night. Tell us, are you safe, and what's happening on the ground in Ukraine?
Yes, I'm safe. I mean, and Kiev's very well protected by air defense, and the scary air alerts here happen. Right now we haven't had one in 2 weeks. Even when they're happening with great intensity, it's every third night. So it's not, life goes on in Kiev. People are out in bars and restaurants. It's a beautiful late summer. Kiev is fine, so not to worry. Elsewhere in Ukraine, not so much. As you say, last night was a bad night in some other places. It was not bad in Kiev. The week before the Alaska meeting was a good week because Putin was trying to behave. And so we all got a full night's sleep for more than a week. And it really was noticeable. I mean, it was noticeable because you realize how much stress people are under when suddenly there's a week without it. Everybody's very different personality, much nicer, much more cheerful. But yes, I mean, you're right. The important thing here is the shameful concessions that Trump is making and proposing, and indeed pressuring, seems to be pressuring Ukraine hard on. And it really is back to the, give Putin whatever he wants.
So we went into this summit on Friday where the European leaders and Zelensky had discussions with Trump and his team about what Trump would do going into the summit. What was that, and how was that reversed?
He agreed to some red lines, including that that Ukraine would not have to give away a big chunk of territory that Russia hasn't conquered. A lot of Ukrainians are coming around to the idea that they might have to, for a while, forego the territory that Russia has conquered. But we're also talking about an area, bigger than the West Bank, that they haven't conquered. They've been trying to conquer for 10 years, and they're claiming. And we went into that with Trump seeming to understand that that was a bad idea to give that up. We went into the Alaska with Trump seeming to understand that it was important to get a ceasefire before we went into detailed talks. I mean, there were a lot of things that he seemed to, that the security guarantees were going to be very important to Ukraine. There were a lot of things he seemed to get. I don't know, he got to Alaska, he didn't seem to remember any of them. He stood there laughing with Putin on the red carpet. He rolled out the red carpet and had, an air salute overhead for a guy who's been an international pariah, and has been killing tens of thousands of people, for 4 years. But what's confusing is that there are two big concessions that seem to me to happen in Alaska. And the world is now focused on one of them and not on the other one. And so it's important to understand these two parallel tracks. One big concession is Trump seems to has agreed with Putin that we should have the ceasefire is not important. We don't need a ceasefire. He can go on killing people as long as he wants until we have a full peace, which is not a good thing, because it means that the negotiations happen under a lot of pressure. But besides that, that's sort of a baseline thing. It seems that Trump is now back to asking for that big chunk of territory to be given up, this Donetsk region, the half of the Donetsk region that they've been fighting over for 10, 11, 12 years, and the Russians haven't been able to make much headway. And now now the US may insist that Ukraine gives it back for free. Blood watered in the soil, of soil watered with the blood of many Ukrainian fighters. The second thing, which is more insidious, but in my view, maybe even worse, is that the reason Putin is invaded Ukraine, and what the war is really about, is not territory. What the war is about is, can Ukraine exist as an independent country with the political system that it chooses and the cultural identity that it shapes and the allies that it chooses? And Putin doesn't want any of that. And Putin stood on the stage in Anchorage 15 feet away from Trump and repeated all those demands in code, right? But he said, our legitimate concerns and a more just balance of security in Europe. And Trump stood there nodding 15 feet away. I mean, we're talking about going back to a Cold War division of Europe, where Russia gets to say, we control this part and we say what we want them, how we want them to live. And the rest of the world says, fine. And at least in 1945, Russia controlled that territory with troops. Russia doesn't even control that territory with troops now. And we're talking about giving it away.
So I want Bill and Matt to jump in at any time, but it seems like I just want to ask a particular question about that meeting. A lot of people who were there at the meeting, reporters, noted that the meeting ended very early. There was supposed to be a bigger press conference. There was supposed to be a second round of discussions. It ended early, and that the aides around Trump were sort of ashen-faced and not looking like, they were happy with what they had heard in the discussions between Trump and Putin. What have you heard about that? What do you make of that? What are even the speculations about what went on?
Yeah, I have no knowledge, right? So I can speculate like all of us. My speculation is that at first Trump thought it was a blow, that at first he went in wanting a ceasefire and he didn't get a ceasefire. He came out empty-handed. And at first I think he took that as a blow. I think over the weekend he figured out, well, I can turn this to my advantage if I give in to Putin and do what he wants. And I mean, I think, to me, that's sort of the point. He was willing to talk a tougher negotiation, but when he didn't get what he wanted, he's now capitulating. And I think in the end, I think Trump sees Russia as a great world power. And it's a great world power that he's admired for 40 years. And, Mar-a-Lago even looks like sort of Russian opulence, gold everywhere. And he wants to be an equal to Russia, and he wants to do business with Russia. And that's always been the driving motive, in my view. And I think now we're back to that. And the end of the press conference was very revealing, because there were no details, so no one paid much attention to it. But go back and watch it; it's 12 minutes. The end of it's all about both of them talking about business deals.
I want to move the discussion to what's maybe going to happen today, but before we do that, I do want to linger just a little bit more about on the issue of this quite extraordinary, unbelievable meeting that happened and what the fallout has been in at least political terms in Washington, the United States. And Bill, you keep a close eye on that. Matt, as you were watching the coverage over the weekend after Friday, Bill, what struck you?
I feel like when I see the coverage of this, there is a tendency to talk with this in some more sterile terms than I would like to see. And I understand the need for me to be neutral, and I don't expect everyone to be in the tank for my side of things. But what Trump is trying to do here is turn the clock back to pre-World War One, where a handful of world leaders draw maps at a whim, and we fought a couple of giant wars to get away from that. Woodrow Wilson, his reputation kind of comes and goes over time, and after the end of World War One, he was criticized because he engaged in that kind of map redraw, even though it really wasn't what he wanted to do. He wanted to get the League of Nations. He wanted to have self-determination, and he had to make compromises with European leaders who didn't want to do that. So he split the difference. He gave a bunch of concessions, but he got his league until the Republican Senate didn't go along, and the thing fell apart. But the idea remained in the air, and Franklin Roosevelt, who was a Wilsonite, carried the ball, and Harry Truman, also a Wilsonite, carried the ball after FDR died, and so it actually happened. And now this whole thing has turned on its head, where it's the European leaders that want to maintain the post-World War II order, where we don't just take land by force and we don't just draw lines arbitrarily without the people's say. And it's all them going to the White House today to try to pressure Trump to not turn the clock back. And so it just strikes me. So one, as a coverage matter, this is startling stuff. So whether I understand, I want to put your thumb on the scale, but this is sort of really huge potential change in how we operate our planet. And it just shows sort of how Trump is 180 degrees away from where we were 100 years ago, where we're trying to get away from this kind of crude, gamesmanship.
Matt, I was texting with a national security friend of mine, and I asked if you got 100 GOP-aligned current and former military leaders in a room and promised them anonymity, how many of them would support Trump's policies toward Russia? And how many would want to throw him in jail? And he said 0 would support Trump's policies, and about a half would want to throw him in irons. What we're seeing can't be what many GOP elected officials, I don't know where the voters are, but you've known a lot of GOP elected officials in this town for a long time. What do you think's going through their head? And do you see in the coverage any pushback by elected Republicans or senior Republican statesman types to this reversion to, as Bill said, to pre-World War II, anything goes world domination by illiberal world powers? Matt, we can't hear you. Are you? Now, unfortunately, can you guys hear? I cannot.
I cannot.
He's got his mute thing tagged. I think he's got to unmute.
No.
We're going to come back to you, Matt. Maybe Ann in her control booth can figure this out, but I do want to hear that answer. But so
all right, can't hear me.
Here we go. There we are.
Okay, try it again. Well, look, Republicans, I think, taking their cue from Trump over the last couple of weeks when he's had a slightly tougher line on Putin and express some frustration about Putin's candor, have shown a little bit more of a vertebrae. I mean, you had this resolution go through the Senate by 85 votes to get a whole big package of sanctions ready, and Thune has got them ready. So I think there is a little inkling, a green shoot of Republicans returning to form. I don't think their innate hawkishness completely dissolved during the Trump era. And you've seen some individuals like Dan Sullivan, the Republican senator from Alaska, who's did a number of interviews over the last few days talking about how Chinese and Russian joint patrols have been buzzing Alaska's waters and airspace. So, there is some hawkishness still out there, but they seem, it only gets activated when Trump shows a little bit. In other words, I don't think they're going to lean on Trump to change. And I think the Europeans know that too, which is part of why they're coming today. We'll see. We'll see if Trump is a pillow who just is shaped by whatever the last impression he had, right? Or if he's really kind of in the tank for Putin. I don't know. I don't know if he's going to bounce back and be a little more, pro Kiev today or not. I couldn't really begin to guess at this point. I mean, I think there's at least a chance that he's not going to be as pro-Moscow as he was on Saturday. And remember, I couldn't help but be caught by the irony, being old, how there was great disappointment that Reagan and Gorbachev had not signed a big deal at Reykjavik the last time there was a big Arctic Circle summit. And there was, some hawks were happy, like Richard Pearl and others, that there was no big deal about nuclear weapons and what was then called Star Wars. This time, great relief among many that there was no deal on Friday night, a sense that Trump might have held his ground. And then, of course, that evaporated over the weekend. We'll see what today brings.
I agree with Matt. It's not, let's see what happens. Let's be open-minded. Let's hope he sees some light. I think Bill put it very well, what we're going back to, or what the risk of what we're going back to, more clearly in a way than I have, about sort of going back to before, to before World War I, of great powers sitting in a room and drawing lines on maps and ignoring the people. I think Trump I'm not sure Trump even understands that. I mean, that was my impression watching this press conference where Putin's talking about that and Trump just looks like he's, can't even hear him. And the way Trump has now, focused the discussion on security guarantees in exchange for giving away that big piece of land in Donetsk, again, that's sort of the more obvious of the two big concessions. And he's focused us all on that. And you could say he's being devious in focusing all on that, but maybe that's all he sees. Maybe that's what he really thinks the deal is. And he doesn't get this bigger dimension. I mean, after all, this is the man who said, if I want Greenland, I should have it. Right. So, I mean, he almost doesn't see anything wrong with the thing that's horrifying us. And in some ways, that's the scariest piece, because he does sort of set the terms of the debate. I mean, I think today's conversation in the White House is probably going to be about that, about the big piece of land versus security guarantees. And this other matter of, what Putin calls the root causes, little shorthand for the big idea that Bill laid out for us so nicely, that it's almost, I wonder if it'll even be talked about. I mean, that's what frightens me.
I've watched the discussions ever since a few months ago. Trump said, "Oh, I'm very upset with Vladimir Putin. He seems to have fed us a load of," I think he used the term, bullshit, and we're going to have to maybe think about sending weapons and have much stricter economic sanctions. And everyone listening saying, "Oh, maybe he's really changed," and a few voices out there saying, "No, he's just lying." And of course, you don't know until it happens. And then he goes to Anchorage And my cynical look on it is, yep, he was just lying. He told people what they wanted to hear. What he's ultimately going to do is sell Ukraine out. I hope that's not true. But, folks, any of you, but Tamar especially, you know what the Europeans want to talk about. And in your story in the monthly today, you talk about what actually needs to be done. Tell us the difference between what the Europeans are trying to convince Trump to do and what you think needs doing.
Well, again, I'm not sure what the Europeans will do. I mean, this is going to be a big test of the Europeans, right? About how, not just, how they frame the conversation, how much they can reframe the conversation around away from what Trump wants. Because Trump, you do have to handle Trump. We all get that. You can't just say, oh, Don, you're wrong. We're going to talk about this. You have to sort of play to him, right? So how well and how skillfully and whatever will they do that? But then how strong will they be in holding to what they want, and how, what do they have the means to back it up? I mean, Ukrainians will go on fighting without the US. Zelensky can't give up Donetsk. The Europeans, they talk a good game, but how much will they do? We'll see. I mean, it's going to be a big test. There's a lot of tests going on in that room today. What should happen, unfortunately, the way I frame it in the piece is there's an easy way to get peace and there's a hard way to get peace. And the easy way is give Putin whatever he wants. And that's what Trump is proposing. And that'll take, a few weeks, and then Trump will win the Nobel Peace Prize. And the hard way is to change Putin's understanding of the costs and benefits of the war so that he comes to the negotiating table in good faith. And that's not going to, that won't be easy. That means real military pressure. That means real economic pressure. And that means the US showing that it means it. The US and Europe so far, we've helped Ukraine, but we've helped Ukraine without being totally clear about what the end game was or how far we would go. And we've wavered. Every time Trump changes his mind, Putin says, aha, they're not sure what they're doing. I can keep going. They're not going to. Putin has to know that for sure the pressure is going to continue until he changes behavior, and that it's going to be really painful. And he doesn't have any reason to believe that now. I mean, this German think tank did the calculations on how much America and Europe has paid to support the war. And it sounds like big numbers, right? 100 billion here, 100 billion there. Both sides have paid at least 125 billion. But it turns out it's less for any country than 0.2% of GDP. I mean, Germany spends more on its clean air bus subsidies. As this usually very staid, non-judgmental German think tank puts it, this looks like a pet project, not a major existential commitment. And maybe for America it is a pet project, but for Europe it should be a major existential commitment. And 0.2% of GDP is not a major existential commitment.
I think it goes with, I think it's tacitly understood, but probably worth just saying on the record, there's no chance that the war would really end if Russia got Donetsk, right? I mean, Putin's ambitions will not end with.
They'll end for a little while. The whole point about Donetsk is not just that they've been fighting for it for 11, 12 years and that there's all these dead people that have died for it. It's that's the high ground and the fortified strategic area from which that if Putin gets it, it will be much easier to take the rest of Ukraine. So, in some minds now, there's a trade-off being discussed in the White House where the U.S. would really provide serious security guarantees and give away that high ground. Well, are the U.S. security guarantees going to make up for that high ground over time? Seems very unlikely to me. And getting that high ground, and it is literally higher, but that's not the only point. It's fortified. Getting that fortified high ground would be that sets Putin up to take a second bite of the apple, third bite of the apple, fourth bite of the apple in 2 years.
When you say security guarantees, Am I wrong that Russia already signed security guarantees with Ukraine two or
Yes,
three
and
times?
Europe too, and Russia just crumples them up and throws them away, right? I mean, Russia signs a lot of treaties it doesn't take seriously, passes laws it doesn't take seriously. It's a dictatorial regime. Europe and America have also committed to security guarantees to Ukraine that they've not held up. Ukraine gave away its nuclear weapons, and we all said, "Oh, we'll protect you," and we did. We haven't. So, I mean, Europe and Zelensky will press very hard today for security guarantees. But I agree, like who would sleep safe at night thinking that
It's
was
almost as if if the discussion goes to security guarantees, it's as if you've finally given up, right? If we're discussing the dotting the I's and crossing the T's of a utterly meaningless piece of paper that is peace for our time,
yeah.
then these other things that you're talking about, robust support military. Am I right, Tamar, that Donald Trump has not delivered one bullet to Ukraine that was not already in the pipeline from the Biden administration?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, there's been all this talk that Europe can buy some, but no, there's been no Trump delivery of weaponry.
Bill, this looks very kabuki to me.
I mean, if I'm Ukraine, and granted, I'm not anywhere close to Zelensky's position. He obviously knows more about his situation than I do. I mean, if I had the capacity to hold out until the Trump presidency was over, I would do that. I mean, his word is worth nothing. We had an Iran deal by Obama that was short of a treaty, so it wasn't legally binding. It was a little more of an semi-formal agreement between both the U.S. and Iran and European nations, and that only negotiations can only work if with trust. And Donald Trump blew up that deal, even though no one else had violated the terms. And at that point, he made it extremely difficult to do deals like that, because you've now set the precedent. It's only as good as the person sitting in that chair. If that person changes, or that person is an impulsive person who changes his mind, then that paper is no good anymore. So why would Zelensky trust a security guarantee? As Tamar pointed out, you certainly can't trust Putin on that score. And if you can't even trust the guy who's supposed to be on your side on that score, then what good is it? So I can't know how much weaponry they have, how much fortitude they have. Can they really stick it out for another 3.5 years? Or is that, if your conclusion is, I just can't do that. So I just got to take the best deal that's in front of me and hope for the best, I would understand. But if I had any way to hang on and hope that maybe the American people are going to shift gears and throw these jokers out, then maybe I can do a deal with someone I can trust. Even then, I can't be sure even that's going to last for more than 4 years, because who knows what happens after that. But that's at least a better hope than right now, where the deck is clearly stacked against me.
I think a lot of Ukrainian soldiers feel that way and are willing to go on fighting. Can they go on for 3 years? Hard. I mean, the trouble is they will need U.S. intelligence, and they will need Europe to buy weaponry from the U.S. And Trump could turn all that off. So they depend on a lot of things. They, make a lot more of their own stuff, and the soldiers on the front line are determined. And people talk to me about, will revolt to continue against Zelensky, to continue fighting. Soldiers have said to me and shown me examples of previous revolts of that kind. It will be a very hard 3 years, especially if the U.S. decides to do nothing and punish Ukraine, and Europe's hands are tied, because of that. So,
and in terms of Trump's motivations, I mean, there's the obvious long-time kind of attraction to Putin, but the negative fallout from the first impeachment being about Ukrainian weapons, putting pressure on Biden, Ukrainians not obliging him. If we know anything about Trump, he does hold a grudge for a long time. And I'm, in some ways, I'm surprised how he's gotten, I wouldn't say over it, but he's at least not let it dominate all of his rhetoric.
Well, let me
fact
let me overcome my own cynicism and push you on that point, Matt. Is it possible that Trump and his closest advisors are feeling the sting of a loss, right? He was
Yes.
humiliated. Now he's going to be surrounded by European leaders who are going to flatter him to say, Mr. President, here's how you can have a win. If you do these things, everyone will say, good for you. You're great. You get the Nobel Prize. And maybe, Matt and Tamar, that involves some weaponry, that involves,
Right.
not so. Is that too
Well,
optimistic?
no, I'm sure their EQ is such that they're going to say, you're the first president to care about peace. You care so much about the casualties. You're so deserving of the Nobel Committee. I can't believe they haven't given it to you already. We can't believe they gave it to Obama. They'll go, Teddy Roosevelt and the Sino-Russian peace. I mean, they'll throw whatever they want to at him to flatter him. And I don't think they'll say you lost last weekend. Here's how you can win. I think knowing his fragile ego, they'll say, here's how you can keep winning and how you can keep it up. Because I think as much as he loves Putin and hates the Ukrainians and hates Zelensky personally, I think the one thing he does want to do is look weak.
Yeah.
And I think they will do everything they can to make him feel like he's muscular and robust and strong. Hopefully that their child psychology will work.
They'll call him daddy.
I mean,
He likes that.
Exactly.
Tamar, the best reasonable case scenario coming out of this meeting, or maybe it's the opening of a series of negotiations, would be what, in your opinion?
That Trump realizes that Putin is asking for much more than he has taken in so far, than Trump himself has taken in so far, and he's sort of it's not that this pillow, pendulum swinging back and forth between listening to Putin, listening to Europe, listening to Putin, listening to Europe, that ends, and he starts to listen to Europe, and he at least continues kind of the status quo ante of a month ago, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, I don't know exactly, where America's prepared to sell weapons to Europe to give to Ukraine. America will continue the flow of intelligence to Ukraine, and ideally we'll start to put serious economic pressure on the third parties. I mean, Putin, what was it? It's 40% of Russian exports are oil. A third of the Russian federal budget is oil revenues. And it's India and China and Turkey and some other countries that are buying most of it. We need to stop that. And every time a missile lands in Ukraine, somebody goes out, a Russian missile explodes. Somebody goes out and takes it apart and looks at the parts. And they either are Chinese or American parts that somehow got by a third party to Russia, or they're Chinese parts. And we just got to stop that flow. We've got to cut off the oil revenues and the technology flow. So that's what has to get added. That's the new piece that Trump would have to, actively do, not just continue from before. But those are, the three. It's not rocket science. It's military force. It's economic isolation, and it's resolve.
Right. Well, on that note, before we go, I wanted to note that while all this is happening in Ukraine and Russia, on the streets of Washington D.C., we now have possibly armed National Guard troops from possibly a series of red states being loaned to the President of the United States to march up and down 14th Street and make sure that Le Diplomat restaurant is safe from carjackings. It's a bizarre situation. Bill, you wrote a little bit about this. What is your read here? Is this, being framed for the American public with the weight and concern that it should be by the press?
I actually, for the most part, I feel like the press has done a good job at pointing out there is no emergency here. Crime in DC is at a 30-year low. I mean, I wrote about it. I wrote about it because other reporters wrote about it, so I knew what the data was. So I don't want to take a knee-jerk position, just beat up the media about everything. But you do see in the punditocracy elements of, well, Democrats shouldn't make a big deal about this because they don't want to look soft on crime. People feel unsafe, and that's more important. There was a New York Times story today, and I remind you, there was some really good New York Times coverage about the data before, and then you have sort of a political pundit type piece saying how Democrats don't want to take this too far. They want to show they care about crime too. And even that, I feel like the quotes of the article are not even as bad as the headline makes it sound before you jump and say Democrats are a bunch of squishes. I do think on the whole, this is something else where you should be extraordinarily unsettled that Trump is letting his inner authoritarian run wild. And I'm sure he's frustrated that he can't have it run as wild as he would like because he still lives in a country with a constitution. As much as he doesn't like that he can't dictate the terms of the Ukraine war because he would like to have the ribbon cutting today and Putin won't oblige. He wants to exert power for power's sake, as far as I can tell. I hate being a psychologist, but that's where I land. Yeah. He gets off on exerting power, and when he can't exert power, he throws a tantrum. And here's a chance where we could say, I even for the judges that you can't flat out take over the police force, I'm sure frustrates him, but he sure as heck can pour National Guard. He's going to keep doing that.
Matt, we have a story by Rob Shapiro up today comparing other presidents that have called out the National Guard and used heavy police presence to taking over the police. What's different today than in the past, according to Rob?
Well, I haven't read Rob's piece. So
okay.
Well, back from vacation, but
sorry about that. Sorry to put
that's all right. That's okay. I mean, I will say that I think the politics of it are. Look, I think it's. It's pretty incredible that he did this. I do think the Democratic reaction of saying, "Oh, he's doing it as a distraction from Epstein," has not been a particularly advantageous position to have. If you read the superb Washington Post coverage on the ground this week, especially yesterday's piece by Olivia Georges, who spent all night on U Street talking to people from midnight till dawn, you had a lot of residents who were not yuppies saying actually it's calmer and they needed something, and these, the gangs of kids really were a problem. The best policy and the best politics for Democrats is to return to 100,000 new police. Good policing is the answer here. National Guardsmen are brave people, but they're not trained and equipped, and the park police is not trained and equipped for this. They're good at crowd control, but this requires good police work, good community police work. And I think the more Democrats get back to that, and less just sort of, talking about this as a distraction or making too big a deal of it being, guardsmen from red states, I don't think it is unsettling, but nevertheless, I don't think that's their best point going forward.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And, Bill Clinton and Joe Biden both responded to crime by putting trained community police officers on the street. It worked.
Yeah.
I think the great question is untrained. And they, by the way, for a long period of time, right? These were permanent changes.
Yeah.
These are short-term injections of untrained military personnel. But just to make clear to our audience, Rob Shapiro thinks, no, there's no analogy between Abraham Lincoln, putting guards on the streets of Washington during the Civil War and James Madison doing the same during the War of 1812, then, because
big balls got mugged.
Big balls got mugged. Yes. All right. Folks, thank you. Tamar, thank you. We really appreciate your reporting and analysis. Bill, Matt, and we will see what happens with this summit in Washington, and whether we get this terrible crime under control. With that, thank you, folks, and we'll be back next week.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank